All right, is this on? Can everyone hear me okay? Did I just turn it, is that good? Okay. I think they put us in the very end of the building just to see who really wanted to be here. So you actually had to make an effort for this. Thank you all for coming. This is, if you went to the session yesterday in the theater during lunch, this is just a prolonged kind of going to follow the same format, almost the same slides. We're going to dive or deep dive into different sections of it, but also really encourage kind of some questions you might have had, or we can a little more interactive. But again, if you went to the one yesterday, it's going to look, this is technically a repeat session, just now in an hour-long format. So it's really hard, even in an hour, to say how do you make your organization adopt Power BI, how do you build a framework for governance and deployment. 20 minutes is, we kind of sprinted through it yesterday, but I think in an hour we can kind of really dive into certain sections and aspects and kind of see things that kind of float to the top. So I'm sure a lot more people will be straggling in when they realize that this is the literal corner of the building. But if you were not there, not at the session yesterday, my name is Tommy Puglia. I live in Chicago. I work at CompTIA as a senior manager of business intelligence. So my job is literally to revamp, modernize, and mature their BI platform, all Power BI, looking at solutions, but also building the reports. A lot of what you're going to see today is my own experience. I've been using Power BI since it was designer. I also lead the Chicago Power BI user group. I used to live in Tampa. I realized that Tampa is a great place to retire to, not to live, but I also led the Tampa user group. And the reason for this session and what I felt was very important was I've been doing this for a long time using Power BI at organizations. And the one thing I felt was lacking, there's always so much support for how to build great reports, how to deploy, how to use the functions. There are white papers for governance and there's white papers for for a team, but I felt what was lacking was what does it actually look like in an organization? And I think this is anytime I give a session, whether it's about this or not, I always tell people, if there's no one at your company who is the Power BI admin or the Power BI champion, become that person, because I think that is a soft skill that's going to be just as important as can you use Power BI, is can you administer and govern Power BI in my organization? And I think that skill is something that is not necessarily defined yet, but is going to be just as important as being able to write the best stacks expression. So purpose and goal of the next hour, again, repeat section, is we're going to talk about the framework and kind of use these slides as different templates. I kind of developed a foundation with 4 pillars for adopting and governing Power BI. So the framework model that I would recommend putting in place is having a foundation. Whether or not you've been using Power BI at your company for years, or you're just starting to, whatever stage you are of Power BI at your company or for your clients, is making sure you have a foundation first. And part of that framework, part of that maturity is what I call 4 pillars. So an adoption strategy, and what are those components? What are the actual things to help you and your company adopt Power BI? What is creating what we're calling roadmaps for teams at your companies to help them understand what they're going to be expecting from the BI team, and what they will be able to, what are their deliverables to actually get reports that are targeted to them. And finally, that governance and standardization. What is the process to request a report? What is the process for your BI team to create a report and then share one? And then finally, the rollout and support. So you might recreate all the reports, but if you create that without communicating that to people, and they go, where's that other report that I liked? You mean the Excel one? Yeah, well, we removed it. And then good luck with that. So because one of the things, you guys probably know this just as well, losing trust in a report, losing trust or having your end users lose trust in your reports is so hard to get back. So the hardest thing to get back is people using your reports, because then they'll use your report, but they'll also download some SSRS report because they're not sure which one's right. So making sure that there's a support and rollout strategy for any changes or any adoption is, I would say all 4 are essential, but you can't lack with any of the 4 pillars. So let's talk about this foundation. And I think before you start with any rollout strategy, before you start with any governance, is a foundation and what we call a maturity statement. And making sure whether or not you're starting from scratch where your boss has no idea that you're about to implement an adoption strategy, or he asked you or she asked you to do this, is having some measurable, definite, and goal-defined maturity statement. And basically saying, increasing adoption throughout the company through X, Y, and Z. If you say, oh no, we already measure adoption. We use those audit reports or the usage reports when I click on a dashboard. If that's the way we measure usage now, we have a little long way to go. Documenting in process, beginning to make this part of your workflow on anything that the BI team does or any reports out there is making documentation in process. Yesterday I said that if you were a BI creator or data analyst, I'm about to give you 3 more roles for your job. We're also now going to become project managers, and we're also going to become authors and I guess legality, but I'm not sure what it's called. We're not a blogger, but you're going to use Microsoft Word a lot more than you're used to. Foundation part of this too is making sure that everything has a defined role and intention. Whether that's for you, whether it's for a report, whether it's for people who are using a report, whether it's for a metric. Everything actually having clearly defined meaning and a purpose. So now I'm also making you a philosopher. So there's a lot we're covering. Again, and I said this yesterday, do not put the philosopher or the project manager on the resume, but just know internally that you are now a philosopher. Because now we're going to be asking what is the meaning of things. Which again, really is, I can get off on a rant on really that's kind of the data as it is. We were looking at data, and everyone looks at data differently, but we shouldn't. Anyways, and then a rollout strategy. So let's talk about then the first component, the first pillar of this foundation, and it's called our adoption strategy. You can do this if you're starting from the very beginning. If you're starting from scratch with your BI program, or you're right in the middle of it, or you feel like you have a pretty fine-tuned machine at your company. Doing this, whether it's on a reoccurring basis or from the first time, the first pillar is kind of pretty much how do we get people to adopt it, or how do we get people to make sure they're continuing to adopt it. So some of the components that we're going to talk about today are 3 things: adoption, revamping, and rollout. This is kind of a project model for adoption outside of the normal governance and outside the recurring rollouts and support. But this is the adoption strategy that you would basically say, hey teams, hey company, this is what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks or next few months. Let's start at discovery and feedback. And these are all in chronological order for your team, saying that if we're adopting is we're starting with discovering all the content, we're discovering all the teams at the company. We're going to revamp, we're going to build that foundation, and then we're going to create a rollout strategy for all the new adoption, all the new reports that we're going to create. So with discovery, when we start with, before we create any reports, before you even open Power BI or understand the data sources, start with a project that is basically scoping and meeting with every team that's going to be using Power BI. And pretty much going through a questionnaire with them, interviewing them, asking them, how do you currently get reports? And again, all of this is also highly documented. Like, where are they currently consuming data? Is it in Power BI? Okay, what reports, what dashboards? What are they doing in Power BI? Ask them to walk you through what filters are you doing in this current report to get what you need. Like, well, yeah, they usually have to go to this page, then they apply these 3 filters, then they export it, then they have to do a pivot table on their own. Great. And ask them to send that to you. Ask them to walk you through all the ways that they consume data, that they communicate with their team on how they are consuming data. Oh, we also use an Excel table, and also the boss doesn't know this, but we also got a client. We also got someone to come in to build us a Zoho report. Cool. We didn't know we had Zoho, but can you show it to me? And understanding where are all the places that team's consuming data. Then it goes in through, this is what you currently have, what you're currently doing. How can we make this easier for you, but how can we get this into Power BI? What is your ideal state of reporting? What would be, the goal is, and what I tell the teams is my goal is when you get in the work in the morning, the first thing you do is check your email. The second thing you do is check your dashboards in Power BI. That is my goal, my selfish goal as a business intelligence manager. And so how can I get that to happen? Because you need, if anything, if they have these 5 different systems, how can I create something that they can start with their day, that they can make decisions? What are issues and concerns? If they're asking for a predictive model, and also it's a data source that doesn't exist, that they all have to manually enter data because someone sends them an email file. Okay, so how is that a concern? How important is that to the overall getting to the desired state? And then once we kind of have those 2 ideas for each of those teams, saying what is current, what is desired, then it's kind of understanding what we are calling, after we have discovery, is for every team, because we've documented everything, pretty much giving them a delivery project plan. And it's pretty much a roadmap for that team, telling them, based on what we talked about, here is what you said is important to you. Here is where we want to be. And then talking about, here are some quick wins. Here's something that we can do starting off, and then here's something that we can, this is where we want to be in 3 months. And then making sure that you actually get sign off on this delivery project plan, because this is now the playbook for you and your team, or for you and that team. Again, teams will trust us if they know they are being listened to, and that there's nothing more frustrating for someone on another team trying to get a BI to do something where it's not exactly what they wanted. Sometimes they don't know what they want, and that part of this document is to pull out the things that you know are important to them, and for them to sign off, because now there's expectations, clear defined expectations, clear defined agenda for both sides. For the BI team to say, this is what you wanted, and they say, yes, this is what I wanted. Then part of the discovery internally. So now you have discovery for all the different teams, whether it's your stakeholders, whether it's the marketing team, the sales team, but then it's beginning to discover all the internal components of your team, or maybe it's just yourself. What is the current organization of content in Power BI? Do you know where all the content exists in Power BI? Do you know who created that report or that dashboard? Why is that workspace there? It's basically saying, trying to document every piece of content, a dashboard, data set, data flow, workspace, saying what's the purpose, who's the audience, and what's the intent. And if you can't give something a purpose, or saying, well, it does this, but I guess so does this do the same exact thing, basically understanding why is this here and why is it better than anything else that we have. This is part of the process to begin to consolidate and remove content that doesn't need to be there. What about all the audiences? Now we had the discovery meetings with all the teams. Does this piece of content meet one of the teams? Does this piece of content meet the requirements of one of the teams or one of the audiences we identified? Yes or no? And pretty much documenting that, saying, not sure who this is for. And then beginning to understand, okay, maybe we created this 8 months ago as a test, so we don't need it. Or maybe this report looks exactly like this report, so do we need both? And if we're creating new reports, maybe this is part of the removal process. And then as part of the defining intentions for every dashboard, saying this dashboard is meant for this audience, this report should be meant for this deliverable. And then what is the process for your own team? Can you specifically say with confidence if someone requests a report, 1, how are they requesting it? Do you have a help desk system? 2, who's requesting it? Should they be able to request a report request? Or should it come from their manager? Should there be approval for that person to request a report? If they are requesting something for the BI team, is it defined whether it's a new report request, a break or fix, or is it an update to a report? Is that clearly segmented and defined in your team? And is there a process wrapped around each of those particular sections? If it's a new report, do you have a workflow to say basically, do we have anything that exists today so we don't need to create a new report. If it's not a manager who's requesting it, should they get approval? If it's a break or fix, do we go to the report creator? Do you have workflows around each of the processes to create a report? And documenting what the current state is. Now, like I said, we have a lot of Word documents out there. We understand what we currently are at. We kind of understand where we're lacking or parts that we need to work on. And then this begins the next stage, what we call the revamping and foundation or standardization. So now it's using those Word documents to say where we're currently at from our external teams to report content to our internal team. Now we're going to begin to revamp and create a process and create clear standardizations for all three of those components. So for prospects for all aspects of BI, are there metrics in your company that are universal that you really don't want to mess up? Like whether it's total sales or quota or budget to goal. I call them universal KPIs, and anything that's labeled a universal KPI has to go through QA in any report that it's going to be part of. So if we create a new report and there's going to be a universal KPI associated with it, it has to go through a QA process to exist in Power BI service. My goal at CompTIA is any report in the service, anyone in my company knows because it's in PowerBI.com, it's got a stamp of approval from the BI team. The BI team has said, yes, this is correct. If there's Joe Schmo's creating a report and he's in marketing and someone just asked him to do it and then he publishes it, and we might not know it exists, but now the marketing team's looking at a report that you're also creating, they asked you to create a report for, and now you have he might not understand all the scoping, but now you're reporting on the same metric. But again, he's Joe Schmo. He's not a Power BI pro like us. So now you have two conflicting attitudes. And of course, God bless marketing. Sorry if anyone's in marketing. Anything they do is usually right. So we got to smooth it out with them. But those kind of situations saying, can we make sure that everything in Power BI has our stamp of approval? And also that trust with all the different members of our organization. So a naming convention for content. Just as important as our ability to organize is understanding the end user's experience. Not just from going to a dashboard to report, but from going to app.powerbi and then going to where they need to be. What is that user experience like? Again, most of us know where every dashboard and report is, and we understand every nomenclature, every code, MCX66. Oh yeah, that's marketing sales campaigns that we did for email last year. Well, not everyone else knows that. So one thing we try to do is every team or sub-team has a different naming convention before each dashboard. So marketing would be MKT and then space the dashboard name. So now if I'm an end user, whenever I see a dashboard shared with me and it says MKT, I know it's marketing. So creating a naming convention that's also going to be understood throughout the company. Goal data sets and hierarchies. This is one thing that you can create the best bookmarks, the greatest features. Look at this dashboard is also in real time with a streaming data set. How cool, right? But if people don't trust the hierarchies or the groupings that you do, or product category V2 because I was testing things out, it doesn't matter what the features are in your report. Clearly define hierarchy and goals and creating a way that making sure that your entire team is using that same data set. For example, a great way is using data flows. If a lot of times you have to create a dimensional reference table in Power BI using a query to get like the product category or the geography, make that a data flow and make that what everyone connects to. Report consolidation. We've identified reports that have no meaning or no purpose. Now it's time to do our spring cleaning. And this is part saying creating a workspace with clearly defined intentions. The white papers for Power BI has their own suggestions. They recommend, the latest white paper said that you should do workspaces based on campaigns or projects that you're working on. I don't recommend that. because I kind of find it's much easier for collaboration. And again, I think every situation is unique, but what I found to be most successful, because again, the workspaces are meant for two reasons. Organization for your team to be able to collaborate, but also for end users, because if they say shared with me, and it says marketing is shared with you, great, that makes it much easier to know what this is going to be about. I recommend doing workspaces based on departments or teams. Because one, you can usually have at least 3 to 5 dashboards, at least 5 to 10 reports that you could probably create per team. If you're only going to have one report in a workspace, maybe you can group that with another workspace. 2, doing it by team and department also allows you to create workspace admins, where basically if you might be the workspace admin for every team, because it also might be just you at the company who's doing Power BI. But it's understanding that someone's responsible for the content in that workspace. If you have a large team, or if you're enterprise, you might have 10 people who are creating reports. So now, but they also may be tasked with a particular team. So making sure that they're responsible for the content in their workspace, making sure it's following the process where it's being, using the naming conventions. If it's a universal KPI, it's been QA'd. And we always create a development workspace where any workspace or any report that's not ready to be prime time, we put in development and we share it with the users, their stakeholders, when we're creating new reports, saying this is in development. We're gonna, when it's ready, we're gonna push it to that X, Y, and Z workspace. Removing those reports with no purpose, because we already identified through our discovery what's going to be clearly targeted for the teams. And the final part is governance and admin. So, and that's one of the other pillars that we will talk about. But this is part now, the process of creating approval and change management systems when we're going to create a new metric for access and sharing, because unfortunately, contrary to people's belief, not everyone deserves to see everything in Power BI. And making sure that there's a process around, if someone requests a report for sales and it has commissions, that the guy from finance probably should see it, so not finance, but the guy from HR, he should also see it. Well, PR doesn't need to see anything. But sorry if anyone who works in PR, but they may not need to see that. And if they request it, and because we get this a lot too, where instead of requesting through the manager, you'll get a little Skype message or email going, hey, notice there was a sales report. Can I get access to that? What's the process now to give them approval? Because I think when we're all starting out, it's like, yeah, sure, man. Let me just share that with you. Cool. And then all of a sudden you're getting these emails saying, why are our sales numbers down? Like, wait, who shared that with you? And then it goes through, you go down a rabbit hole that you never needed to be down. So anytime someone asks for access to a report, it goes through a process. Obviously, if it's your boss, go right ahead. But I'm not trying to create any conflict here, but anyone who's accessing or requesting access and you're even not sure who they are, or you are sure who they are, being able and giving us ability too, as the BI department, to have some pushback, because usually we are at the feet of the team, because we're here to support, we're here to serve, and sometimes that can get a little taken advantage of. We're like, yeah, sure, we can do this for you, but we're not going to deliver quality if we don't have ability to push back, to make sure that anything that we're doing is providing the entire business value, not just one person. Data champions team, again, we'll talk about a little more, but going back to the hierarchies and the grouping, making sure that's understood that every team is also on the same page on how we're grouping and using business logic. And finally, rollout and support. So now we have discovery. Now we have a project plan. Now we understand what reports we're going to be creating. Like I said in the beginning, is you can't just remove everything and then all of a sudden create all these new reports with all these new features, because now instead of using 18 slicers, we're going to utilize the cross drill through or cross filter in visuals. If everyone sees this, well, I'm not going to say the quote I'm going to say, but people would lose their minds. But you can fill in the last word with what would really happen. Rolling out the new reports, rolling out the new process is such a vital part of this, saying, okay, we have these 3 reports for sales and marketing. Okay, so we're going to push these live, but we're not going to push these live without training them, without showing them. So what we call roadshows, a meeting with each of those teams on an individual basis, saying, here's what to expect next week, saying these reports will be gone. They are being replaced by these reports and these dashboards. Here's how to use them. Here's how to navigate them. And meeting with each team to show them what's going to be removed and what's coming up. And this, again, includes not just building up from the ground up, but if you're making a major change to reports because business rules changed in the company, or there's just a need to revamp the features in a report. Having a rollout or change strategy is vital. For example, Power BI loves to update Power BI service with great features, but without allowing any of us to test it out. I'm going to name the filter pane. I'm going to name the consistent filters. I mean, does anyone remember what kind of agita we got when all of a sudden they're like, hey, why is the numbers right? It's like, oh, well, you have to change everything to default filters or default state. It's like, well, why'd you do that? Like, I didn't. Or when they did the personal bookmarks. Those 3 things that kind of just happened, and you're like, oh, well, I guess now everyone's going to, when people are so used to adding 3 filters, and now Power BI is just saving everything for them, but they don't know. Rolling out communication for Power BI updates, like features and functionalities, and then updates to the business logic or new reports. Having a communication plan for this. Making sure that almost like now we're also web developers, because usually web developers don't just push anything out. It goes through a change management system, there's communication, and then they push it live. And that should be the same exact thing, because again, the primary thing is we are instilling confidence in our end users. We are not letting them lose trust in what we do. Any change we do without communication will lose trust. And we want to instill confidence that we know what we're doing, we're pushing changes, they're on the same page. And promoting your team, and again, it could be just Jim. The BI team is Jim. One thing that I noticed that was cool that Microsoft does, and we kind of copied it, was anything that was part of for their BI team, they kind of do a label. It's like BI @ company name. So like BI at Microsoft. So any communication that came from the BI team, it would say new updates from BI at Microsoft. I thought that was cool, and it gives you a little more structure. It gives you a little more. Can't think of the word at the moment, but it gives you a little more sense of being an actual team at the company, not just Jim. You can even call it BI at Jim or Jim at BI if it's just Jim, but kind of establishing you as a player at the company, saying, we need to talk to BI at CompTIA, or BI at CompTIA has done this. Using some sort of ticketing system, and usually most companies have this, but working with your IT department saying, hey, can you create something for us where basically it's reporting request and new reports, break fix, or updates. And again, the system for any changes and updates to reports. So before we move on, I'm going to back up, show you the kind of the components, and then if you guys have any questions, we'll go to the next part. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I'm finding myself, as I'm listening to you talk about these elements, they sound a lot like, 10 years ago I was doing OBIEE or MicroStrategy or business objects, having a ticketing system, for example, and so it'd be the same kind of idea. I'm wondering, is there anything fundamentally different about governance in the context of Power BI and these things you're talking about that's different from that previous generation of tools?
It's probably so basically he's asking is, how is this different from 10 years ago with the BI tools and platforms? I would say first and foremost, I think because this is such a rapidly changing technology, and I think BI is, but especially that Power BI is kind of pushing that self-service part. So now, 10 years ago, not everyone could create a report in Power BI, but now anyone can literally download Power BI at your company, and if you don't have the right tenant settings, they can also publish it. So now anyone can technically just grab an Excel sheet, connect to it, drag and drop, and have no idea what they're doing, and now it's in PowerBI.com. That's the difference now, where there's that more, I think they even said in their blog yesterday, like the citizen analyst, where that didn't exist 10 years ago. You had to know JavaScript or you had to know the coding languages to create a report or SSRS. Now people can access, export. More people have ability. If they know Excel, they can create a report and publish it saying, hey guys, look at this. So I think it's different in that sense where there's more citizen analysts, self-service. But ultimately, no, I think governance is governance. But having a process and a system in place is whether it's, and it's going to be the same way 10 years from now, however it changes. Yes?
How do you distinguish workspaces that have been created outside of
You come in with a broom and no. No, so that we had a problem years ago. We had a piece of a dashboard that the person was no longer at the company, but it used a content pack. And basically, we went down a rabbit hole going, okay, hey, do you know who shared this with you? Who shared it with you? And we kept going down where ultimately we couldn't even access it because the guy got removed and he was the only person that had access to it. It was a content pack that everyone was still using. So it's kind of like how, and I didn't know PowerShell, so I couldn't add me, and it was an old workspace, so you couldn't add yourself as an admin. But trying to go, so it's tough. That is the toughest thing, where there might be, you might do an audit log and go, why are there 500 workspaces? Like, you go, oh no. But I would recommend becoming the role in Microsoft, the global administrator, not the Power BI service level administrator, and then you can create a security group to say, only these people can create workspaces. For everything else, it's going down a lot of different rabbit holes. Any other questions? I saw a few other hands up. Okay. So let's move forward again. Okay, so we talked a lot about that discovery and this discovery and feedback, the scoping, and then the delivery projects. Again, part of this is constant and consistent communication with teams. And again, this is part of that adoption because building trust is letting people know that, yeah, we are working on it for you, and understanding that there is something in the process. So one thing that is vital is we call basically roadmaps for each team to say, okay, we're revamping everything, but this is what to expect. And again, it's managing expectations and it's clear, constant communication. So roadmaps for teams, let's move this down, is basically telling teams everything that you'll be working on. And we already talked about scoping and discovery. We already talked about the delivery and the project plan. And again, that project plan, you push to those teams saying, this is our playbook. So if there's something here that needs to be revised, let's revise it. If there's something in here that needs to be added, let's add it. Because we need sign off for you, because this is what we'll be basing everything around. One of the things that people really like, but is also, I think, just as vital instead of pushing anything live, is always for new reports that are built on a different business logic is called sandbox reports. And using Power BI as a prototyping tool, not just as a visual and actionable tool. Basically, if it's a completely new request, creating a report that puts in two different phases. Phase one is sandbox. And basically, you're just kind of inputting data. You're showing a bunch of different features. The colors aren't perfect. The naming isn't great. The layout's not perfect. The point of a sandbox report is to show your end user functionality and use cases. You walk them through going, okay, you asked for this and this and this. Here's one way we laid it out. Here's another way we laid it out to get their feedback. Sandbox reports are meant, and the purpose is to get feedback, to throw things out, to go through iterations. With the understanding that they know, do not communicate on performance with a sandbox report. It's in development. The purpose of this is to throw things out. This is great for your end users and for the report creator because one, it allows us to not show them an end product that they're not happy with, and allows us to show like, here's all the features. Look, we can do bookmarks, or there's this drill through feature, and starting to get feedback from the end users so they know that like, oh, I don't like this, or actually, what would be great. Could you show the cities by by every month compared to the previous year? because I like what you did here, but I would like it like this. So getting their feedback, because they're not going to tell you right off the bat when you ask them, like they want a new report. They're not going to say, well, I want a year over year and a trending chart, and also do a tree map that drills in. They're not going to know that. But showing them potential use cases, potential functionalities, that allows them to be inspired, and that also allows them to say, this is not important. I don't need this. So we're not going to spend time doing things that we think are really cool, but it's not going to be, at the end of the day, not going to be vital for them and for them to make decisions. And this is part of showing them features and functionality, but also the data points, saying, okay, we group things this way. We created a hierarchy this way. And also, are these the right metrics? We have year over year for total sales. Then you start getting an idea, because they're going to ask, where's that number coming from? And we say, okay, well, we're looking at this based on the date of the transaction was sold. Like, well, no, we don't need that. We want to actually see when they actually, when it is actually shipped. Those ideas, rather than showing them a live report and then those questions coming, using the sandbox phase to understand really those requirements. And once you kind of get those requirements, a few iterations of the sandbox phase, then it goes off to development. And then finally, and I should also mention, for most of these phases for the roadmap, this should only be with the stakeholders. So this should not, if your team has 100 salespeople, not 100 people should be seeing this. Should be just the stakeholders, leadership that should be providing feedback. Once we are kind of done with the sandbox, it goes in development, final QA, and then making sure that the stakeholder signs off, pushes it to production, and in this case that means removing it from development, moving it to the right workspace, and then that communication saying, hey sales team, BI at Jim has developed this report. We'll be sending a roadmap, a roadshow to how to use it. Here's what we'll be using. Here's where to find it. Here's the link. And then going through the education with the team. And this would be for any team, again, whether you're starting off from the very beginning or a new report request. But especially when you're starting from the beginning. Starting with this to get people understanding this is the new process. And also saying this is how BI at Jim works now. An example roadmap and kind of constant communication looks basically like a template where basically saying our leadership, our main objective, which is basically from our delivery project, and basically showing each team you're in progress 30, 90, 100 days, what to expect. In this case, we're saying, okay, we realize how important it was to get definitions correct, so we're going to establish that data champions team. That's our primary goal right now. And then we just gave you a sandbox report, and so we need the feedback now. In 30 days, we should have at least near completion with our data definitions. And then we're going to start beginning to roll out those KPIs because they're understood. 3 months from now, we should have a lexicon and dictionary, and then we should be able to dive into deeper level reports after our foundational reporting. And communicating this either weekly or bi-weekly, just to give constant updates where you're at with each team. And this could be one slide that you email to them or one slide during your meetings with them. But going through and showing teams roadmaps for what BI is doing for them. Any questions about the roadmap? Yes? I have terrible hearing, so.
Question about the development process. So you mentioned having sandbox, QA,
Right.
et cetera. Do you envision just creating different workspaces for each, or do you just?
So I would just create one development workspace, and then all the BI report creators just work in that workspace, rather than creating development workspace for every team. So, and the development workspace can get cluttered usually pretty quickly, but again, that's only meant for the BI team to see and collaborate on. So the other workspaces are your primed and proper and stamped. Yes?
You mentioned that there might be creators in multiple departments.
Yes.
How do you get these people in multiple departments to follow this process?
Yes.
Documentation and publishing.
Yes.
It's more like what
Right.
development.
So this is part, you're a little buy-in from obviously leadership, but One thing that I recommend, basically she was asking, okay, well, let's say there's all these other people who create reports in Power BI, they're on different teams. Why should they follow this? Or that's basically what they were saying. How do we get them in line? Well, becoming a Power BI admin, the role, allows you to control a lot of things. So what I would recommend if you do have a lot of that is, one, having quarterly meetings on anyone who's created a report. They have to come to this meeting. If they don't, they cannot publish. And you can actually set that in Power BI tenant level settings. It's saying only people from a security group can publish to a workspace. If you have premium, then you can really control it because then you have premium assigned to workspaces. But using the Power BI tenant level settings, creating a security group for the approved people who can create a report. Anybody else, if they don't come to the meeting, or if you notice they're not following the process, you remove them. And then you're going to get an angry email from their department, and you're going to get an angry email from them, but you're going to tell them, listen, they have to follow the rules of the process. They didn't come to the meeting, so we remove them. So that's one way to kind of say, yeah, go ahead.
Is there any process in place or coming in the future where you could potentially deploy Power BI apps through Azure DevOps?
A little louder. Oh, Azure Ops.
Azure DevOps?
I know there's some integration, but I haven't done a lot with that, no.
You can have like approvals.
Yeah, that would be great if they did that, actually. But now you're making everybody a developer here, and yeah, I think we have enough. Yeah, so basically Azure DevOps would do a lot of this, but I don't think there's really anyone who's done a lot of integration with that, but that would be a great feature if you can kind of use that same idea. We tried doing that where we tried putting our files in repositories, but then it became it's just not meant for that right now. But so, yep. Yes.
Just say we're doing something sort of like that on-prem now. We can talk after, but locally, what's your experience been with automating some of this quality assurance stuff? I mean, someone can make a report and they say, okay, well, last year's revenue was $2 million, and then they make a change and now it's 1.5. And you know, you can't just give that to somebody and say, here, go check, make sure the report's right. They stamp it. So what kind of automation have you got in place? Is that on your list?
Automation. Microsoft Flow, somewhat, no. Honestly, so when it comes to making sure that those universal KPIs are correct, there's not really an automation, but just more of a system going, someone who's familiar with that, like there should be a champion for that universal KPI knows it forever. And you should basically show them, here's the query I was using, here's the DAX function I was using. Is this right? Because in a lot of scenarios, we're always doing some different filters because you're trying to show some different view. Part of that communication too is saying, if you want the actual company-wide number of year over year, look at the leadership dashboard. This report that we're creating, this is meant for HR, for example, or this is meant for the USA sales. So it's not going to be, you're never going to get it replicated exactly because it's not meant for that. But yeah, right now there's no particular automation around that. Okay, so now some more fun things, and we did talk about some of this, but now the governance of Power BI and the pillars. So some of the aspects of governance is what we talked about with a data champions team or a data champions committee. Do you have a dictionary that anyone can go to find a definition of a product segment or definition or how a KPI is calculated? Does your BI team have a process that, like you said, must be adhered to and must be followed? How is the collaboration done in your team? If, let's say, Jim at BI left the company, can you access all the reports that were being used, or does IT need to go into his computer? So making sure that anything that's getting uploaded or removed can still be accessed. And so, data champions. One thing we realized very quickly was every team uses different terminology. It's like, well, no, I think labs should be under this category, no, I think labs should be a subtype of this category. If different teams have different terminologies, again, it doesn't matter what metrics or functionality you have, people are not, when you want people to report or communicate on performance, you want them to be able to have a bridge to talk to every other team, not a wall. So one idea is creating a data champions team where it's a representative from each major team at your company that knows intimately the data, whether this could be the manager or leadership, or it could be someone who knows the data intimately, or knows how the team speaks, or knows the terminology the team uses. And this team will be meeting to establish how each team's talking about categories, hierarchies, and define that terminology. They are responsible for making sure that that data champions team comes to an agreement. There'll be obviously a lot of arguing, but ultimately you have leadership in there to kind of say, no, this is what we'll be doing from now on. Purchases will always be based on the date that it was redeemed, not the date that it was purchased. Things like that. They might not have to go as technical, but they will understand a lot of these things. That's what each representative should be. And they are responsible for each of their teams to be using this terminology to help communicate the new logic and the new rules. And so really what this team is meant is to create a common language for the entire organization and to finally have a bridge. So whenever I see product sales type, I know that Team 3 and Team 5 also know what product sales type is. And they also know what's the subcategory for product sales type. Or I know when I'm looking at date redeemed, I know it means this. And also every other team has that same definitions. We can create all the logic possible, but ultimately at the end of the day, we need the collaboration with the other teams in the entire company. Internal team governance. One of the great things, and I encourage you to do this soon, but one of the great things about the classic Workspaces that I love is that they create an Office 365 group. The new V2 versions do not. But one thing that we did for the collaboration is all the Workspaces, development, creating a BI at Gym Workspace, basically for like internal team, marketing, sales, human resources, finance. All reports must be stored in those SharePoint files. There are many benefits of using SharePoint document libraries for report organization. One, it syncs with your computer. So you can sync a SharePoint library so it's on your computer. That's what you use to edit, create, and modify a report, and it syncs back up to the server. Two, version history. You can go and view online a particular report file, and you can actually right-click and it says more version history. So you can actually see every time that report was saved. If you broke it, you can see when it wasn't broken. And it will save every single time. Three, any report that's in the service was also going to be in, it's not automatically, but what it helps you govern or manage anything in the service in that workspace must be in that SharePoint library. And if it's not, you contact whoever created that report saying, can you add this to the SharePoint library? So now anyone can work on it. If someone's gone for a week or someone goes to Italy for a month, if there needs to be an update to that report, someone can go in because they're a BI team, they can collaborate and they can publish it. So internal team governance through SharePoint libraries. The standard process of development that is, you don't necessarily need to use the same exact template or the same exact color theme, but you should follow some design standards because you want reports to feel familiar across teams. Again, it doesn't need to follow the exact same 100% layout, but it should be familiar. If I'm using a white background, someone's using a black background with 18 colors and a lightning bolt, you might have a problem. Does it follow a structure where the KPIs are formatted on the top? There should be a process for new report creation or a layout. That should make it feel familiar across teams. And deployment in Workspace to give access, when you do push something live, it should go through a step-by-step process of first, giving access to the stakeholder, second, working with your team to see who else needs access, and then any other reports that anyone who else needs access, it goes through the same different process. And then the sharing deployment, and then the data flows. Is anytime once the data champions team goes through and kind of defines how the hierarchies and the grouping is going. A central repository, a central location where people go to connect and make sure they're all using the same grouping, the same hierarchies, and the same dimensions. And making sure like, hey, I noticed you did manual grouping on this file. Don't. Can you use this data flow or this Excel file to connect to reference? All these processes for the internal team. Finally, the last pillar, rollout and support. And again, this is something that happens near the end of the overall adoption strategy, but this is one of the things that should always be in continuation and always be followed. Some rollout strategies, and we did talk about a lot of these, but promoting your team, and again, this sounds like a soft skill or not necessarily something measurable or adopted, but being able to establish you, your team, your department as just as standardized as the sales team helps in terms of being able to push back and being able to deliver quality. Having a ticketing system or help desk system with different processes, the SharePoint site, and then finally measuring adoption and use. There are many ways that you can measure adoption. If you do become a global administrator, you can download the audit logs. That's the way I recommend, because you can not just download how many people are viewing it, but you can also see the activity of who's creating a workspace or who's creating a report. We use this to basically say if there was someone creating a workspace or group that was outside of our team, then we would go through a system of emailing them going, hey, notice you created a report. Can we get access to it? And then also, you're invited to our quarterly BI team process meeting. Please attend, or you won't be able to create a report. So being able to see what people are doing in your company, because they will download every activity that's happening in Power BI. To get access to the global administrator is usually a little tough with your IT team. Say, hey, can I audit the entire company and everything they do in Microsoft? Usually you're not going to get, yeah. So the way I got access, I said, look, you can audit me auditing the audit log. If you see me audit anything outside of Power BI, remove my access, because I'm only needing this for Power BI. I wish that Power BI had a setting where we can just audit the Power BI activity, but right now you have to be a global administrator. So basically trying to get access, or at least having someone get access to a weekly report, being able to see adoption. Another way with adoption too is, let me go down, is not just the audit logs, but also feedback and surveys. And I'll get into that just real quick. And then promotion and communication. That promotion, creating a SharePoint site, an internal site for your BI team that would basically say, here's all the resources, here's how to submit a ticket, here's new updates, here's our blog, here's our roadshow schedule. Having an intranet site that you always mention in every communication, every email going, hey, here's your new report, Jim. If there's any Jims here, you should be very flattered today. But here's your new report, Jim. By the way, for any new updates, please visit BI at company name for more info. And your intranet site would have your schedule, how to submit a report, and then even a training video on drill through and bookmarks, on how to use drill through and bookmarks. And again, that workflow for the ticket request, making sure that any part of a project of updating, breaking, fix, or a new report goes through constant communication going, thank you for submitting your ticket. Here's your new, you'll be assigned a meeting for scoping. Thank you for our scoping meeting. Here's, next week, we'll show you a sandbox report. The communication and promotion. And finally, measuring adoption. One thing that I think that could be highly utilized, and maybe not, I don't think I want to see this, but feedback surveys for report requests. Basically using Microsoft Flow or Microsoft Forms and integrating that with Flow. It's anytime a new request is finished, sending them a form to say, how was your experience? Did you get everything you needed? How long was the time duration in your expectation, what you expected? What would you want to change? And getting ways to actually measure the feedback on your process to update this. And then doing recurring scoping meetings, maybe once every twice a year, twice a year doing scoping meetings, going, okay, we did all the promotion and adoption. Now, where are we currently at? What changed from the first time you did the discovery meetings? Are they where they want to be? Are they where you want them to be? And then finally, the audit logs. So that is a way to greatly measure adoption. And then finally, unless there's any questions, thank you so much for coming. And then evaluate this session, speaking of feedback and to measure adoption. But you can go to the mobile app, and if we have any questions, I'll happily answer them. But thank you guys.